Like many, I'm half and half when it comes to this episode. On one hand, I love Android 17 being an absolute badass, because he's one of my favorite characters, and I always loved him when I rewatched the Android saga in Dragon Ball Z. And on the other hand, this episode had some things about it when it came to the animation that really bugged me. Now, besides looking at all the flaws or all the good things, I want to talk about both. I want to focus equally on both sides. So before I get into the good stuff, let's talk about the bad. So when it comes to the latest episode of Dragon Ball Super, there is a lot of reused animation. And I don't think many are probably going to miss that fact, because there was just so many obvious scenes in the latest episode that were reused constantly throughout the episode. It wasn't like using a little bit of animation from the last episode. It wasn't like that. They would use the same clip that they started the episode off with and used it another 5 or 6 times throughout the episode, which is very nerve-wracking, because normally when it comes to animation and reusing animation, especially for a series like Dragon Ball Super that is a weekly series that comes out for a very long time, it's not like a seasonal series where it's only 12 episodes or 24 episodes, it lasts a lot longer than that. You should expect some episodes to have reused animation, and so I can let that slide for the most part when it comes to series like Dragon Ball Super. However, I can deal with it maybe being used once, twice, or 3 times, but the thing is that Toei Animation definitely pushed the limit of using the same animation over and over. I don't know exactly what happened, but I feel like there was something going on with the production team when it came to making this episode, because let's talk about the Universe 2's actual God of Destruction. That entire scene when she was just putting her hand out and all that, that scene was reused like 6 times, 5 to 6 times. Go back and look for yourself. It is just absolutely ridiculous. If it was used for maybe 2 times or 3 times, I would have been like, okay, fine. But it was used like 5 or 6 times, which is very annoying. It wasn't just the fact that it was reused, but they made it the exact same thing. The overall zooming out from her and everything, it was the exact same. There was not even any additions or edits to the scene at all. It was just like, okay, so let's copy and paste this scene to this part of the episode. Let's copy and paste this scene to the next part of the episode. That's what they did. And so they saved themselves some time when it came to production of this episode. And I mean, there was just many scenes that were reused. Like, you know, Beerus, you know, you saw his face, he was leaning to the side, and he was looking at the contestants. There was just many scenes that were reused. And like I said, stuff like this happens. It happens in series like Dragon Ball Super, so normally I'll let it slide. However, it was just so apparent and so obvious, especially when there is a scene like transformations. When you have magical girl transformations going on in any episode, you're gonna notice, you know, the repetitive animation. That's just a given. And that is something, one of the big things actually I dislike about the genre of like magical girls, is seeing the transformation sequences overused over and over and over again every single episode. It's very annoying, because it's a way for them to cut budget and cut costs and all that, and basically just make it easier for them, which I understand that, I understand. However, it's just very annoying for the viewer. I don't like seeing a transformation sequence that's not really anything important at all. It's just fluff for there, just to see this girl transforming. It's cool the first time maybe, but then when you see the second or third time, you're like, fuck no, just skip this shit. And no joke, when I saw it the first time around, when I saw the transformation of the girls, and then it started playing it again, I skipped like 10 seconds ahead, it was still going through with it, I'm like, oh my god. I skipped another 10 seconds, it was still going through, I'm like, okay, no, I'm not doing this. I literally skipped the entirety of the second transformation of this episode, because it was the exact same thing. And it wasn't like, okay, let's, you know, do this transformation this episode and the next episode. It was used consecutively. Like, there was maybe a 2-minute gap between each transformation, and it was the full length from both. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? So I didn't really like how that was in the episode alongside of just reused animation when it came to the Universe 2's actual God of Destruction. It doesn't make sense to me, like, why tell you to do that? It felt like they definitely wanted to make it obvious that they just couldn't make this episode beautiful, like they normally could from the recent episodes, because the recent episodes of Dragon Ball Super have looked very good. They've looked good, and the animation has been good. I mean, there's been some flaws here and there, obviously, but overall, it's looked decent, especially for a series like Dragon Ball Super, and so I was a little bit upset with this episode because of that. But with that out of the way, let me talk about the positive now, because I think I've kind of talked about that enough. So, there is one thing, actually, the neutral side of this argument, besides animation, and many could take this as being a good thing or a bad thing, so actually I want to get into that before I get into the positive stuff. The big thing that everybody doesn't like about this episode, besides just the animation, is the fact that there was a lot of comedy in this episode, and personally, that doesn't bug me. At the end of the day, that does not bug me. Number one, comedy is subjective, so you can't really judge comedy and say, oh, it's a shit episode because of comedy. You cannot judge an episode because of that, because comedy, like I said, is subjective. You cannot say it's good or bad. However, many don't like this episode because of how it tried to change the tone, and I could see where this argument can lie, because this arc is about the fate of the entirety of the multiverse. All these universes are going to be disappearing if, you know, one team loses. Like, if one team is completely out, their entire universe gets erased, and so their life is on the line. Everybody's life is on the line, and so you would think everybody would be serious. However, this episode was very funny. It had a lot of comedy in it, especially with the transformations from the second universe, where you get to see how they were transforming. Their forms looked very funny. Vegeta's reaction to some of them were very funny, to just how 17 comes in like a badass, it interrupts the transformation. I'll talk about that soon. But basically, overall, just there were some scenes here that tried to shift away from that serious atmosphere that the recent episodes have had. And I can see why many might complain about this, because you'd think, a tournament that is based around the fate of your universe, you'd be serious, but seeing transformations like this and all that, many might not be able to take it serious, especially when the last episode ended off with saying all of the shit fodder fighters are now out of the ring, and so now the serious fighters can now take to the ring and start fighting. So many assume that we wouldn't have, comedy or anything like that, but we did get that in this episode. And like I said, I personally had no problem with it because of one big reason. Number one, Dragon Ball Super's tried to have a nice good mix or blend of Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball. And many are probably unaware or have forgotten that Dragon Ball was very funny. There was a lot of comedy put in Dragon Ball, and there was some comedy in Dragon Ball Z, but nowhere near as much as in Dragon Ball. And many seem to have forgotten that that is a big thing when it comes to Akira Toriyama. He loves comedy. He loves putting that in his series. And so seeing stuff like this in Dragon Ball Super, it comes at no surprise to me. I think it's perfectly fine. It fits the style of writing of Akira Toriyama, so I have personally no problem. But once again, comedy's subjective. If you like it, you like it. You don't like it, you don't like it. And that's understandable. However, I think many forget that fact that there has always been comedy in Dragon Ball, so something like this is really not out of the norm. It's honestly normal to see something like this. In fact, it would be even unnormal if we didn't see comedy in this tournament, especially with all these wacky universes fighting each other. So, with that being said, let's talk about the positive stuff of this episode. Number one, I think I made it already very clear I am a big Android 17 fan. He's not my favorite, like my number one favorite, but he is up there. He's in my top 10, top 5 favorite characters of Dragon Ball Z, or Dragon Ball in general. I just have always loved his character. I always thought he was a badass, and as I said in my last review, I always loved the History of Trunks movie. I love seeing the androids fight, future Gohan and future Trunks. It was just a very badass fucking movie, a very dark movie, and I liked the tone of it, especially how these androids are just evil, but then they can be good sometimes as well. And in this case, this episode reminded me of why I love 17 so much, is because he has that serious attitude and he wants to get shit done. He's not going to sit there and let someone transform in front of his face. He's going to do shit, he's going to get shit done, and he's not going to be kind of nice overall. He's going to be merciless, and that is what we see in this episode. So I personally love this episode because 17 was in it and I'm a big fan of him, and also seeing the man go up against the grain of Dragon Ball in general when it comes to transformations, because normally when you think of transformations in Dragon Ball, usually our characters are just sitting there and watching. They're watching the fighter transform and get stronger. And I remember that a long time ago, I was having a discussion with some of my friends, like years ago, like a long time ago, we used to say, like, why doesn't Goku, Gohan, Vegeta, or anyone attack the fucking villain when they're transforming? It makes no sense. Stop staring at the villain. Stop staring at them and letting them transform. Go fucking beat their ass. Even Team 4-Star from Dragon Ball Z Abridged, they make fun of this fact with Frieza. In the Frieza, Abridged part of the series, they make fun of that fact. And so this has always been a big topic of discussion and a meme in the Dragon Ball community, And I like how 17 goes up against the grain of that, and he attacks them in the middle of a transformation. He's like, fuck you, and just shoots them and interrupts them, and it was very funny. It's kind of like Dragon Ball became very self-aware in that moment. When he saw Goku, he just ran over to 17, and when you saw Toppo, he came over, and when you had the 3 girls that were trying to transform as well talk to him, it's like, what the fuck you doing? Like, why are you interrupting us and all that? It was funny is because it's like, okay, so this is why we always stood and watched, because we need to let them get stronger, and 17's like, why do I even try? He's like, what the fuck? Like, why do I even try? So this is what you did? You watched me get absorbed by Cell? You guys are just watching? I mean, that's funny when you think about it, because technically, everybody kind of watched Cell absorb the androids. And 17's like, probably thinking in his mind, like, these motherfuckers. Like, this is what they did. When I got absorbed by 17, I mean, I absorbed by Cell, I don't know why I said 17, but I was getting absorbed by Cell. They were probably sitting there watching, like, what the fuck is wrong with these two? So are all of these guys here. So that was funny. I had a good laugh from that, and I liked how self-aware Dragon Ball was in that moment, because that's always been a running gag with the series, and so I did appreciate that. And so I liked how 17 was being a badass there. But then also when he was fighting the fighter from the second universe, and overall it seemed like it was kind of like an equal matchup in terms of speed, but then 17's like, you know what? I'm done. I'm fucking done. I'm done with, you know, trying to be a little bit nice. I'm just gonna be serious, and he just KO'd both of these fighters and just knocked them out of the ring like it was nothing. I did appreciate that too. 17 was like, I'm not dealing with this bullshit. He just took him out. That was it. So, overall, the latest episode of Dragon Ball Super, it was a good episode. Like, at the end of the day, I think it was a good episode. The only major problem with this episode, besides the subjective comedy, is the animation. And I don't know if this will be fixed in the Blu-rays or BDs, DVDs, or whatever when they finally come out. I don't know, but regardless, so that's the only problem or major flaw in this episode, personally, to me. Besides that, I think it was a good episode. So, yeah. Oh, yeah, one other thing. Shout out to Frieza just, you know, blowing away those hearts. He's like, I'm not having none of this shit. Like, he was just doing that. He was just waving his hand as the hearts were coming in. He's like, fuck that shit. Get that shit out of here. Like, get that shit out of here. I had a good laugh from that. Frieza's not doing none of that shit. He's like, I don't feel love or anything. My heart is cold as fuck. There's, like, no way I'm feeling any love. I like that scene. I really like that Frieza scene. It's just funny to see Frieza kind of out of his natural environment, and seeing how he acted like that, I did have a good laugh. But anyways, though, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love you all so much. Please be safe. Chibi out.